There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I'm your host, Richard Schaff. The program sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here by the grace of God. We're also on YouTube 24/7. Same heading, What in the World is Going On by Richard B. Schaff. Lots of times it's this radio program. If you can't get us here, you can get us there. Let's look first at the international scene. We're all up to date, we think, on the drone attack that hit that Saudi oil field. You know, that was really something that came to light that was realizing the worst fears of a lot of national security teams. This was an apparent strike in the heart of Saudi Arabia by small, unsophisticated drones. They knocked out a good percentage of the Saudis' oil production. Based on early reports, multiple relatively inexpensive drone devices were able to pierce the Saudi defenses in a way that a traditional air force could not have done, flying long distances to drop their potent bombs. The attack, for which the Houthi rebels battling Saudi Arabia and Yemen first took credit, underscored the fears raised by U.S. security forces and experts in terrorism about the rapid evolvement of technologies, allowing expanded unmanned flights. The bottom line is that we are likely to see many more of these sorts of attacks, and in particular, coordinated attacks by multiple targets are likely possible in tandem with a cyber attack component. Now, folks, we now know pretty much 100% that Iran was behind this. They're not a first world country either, and for them to be able to take this action certainly gets our attention. Our president is on the fence as to what way he's going. Watch Fox News, and you'll know. Going along with this, I want to point out at this time in the Middle East, as I am taping this on Saturday, I cannot tell you what's going to happen with the Israeli elections. I don't know. It doesn't look good for Netanyahu. I don't know that he's going to be able to put a government together. We're not going to comment on it at this time, but it's something that you need to watch. Now a follow-up, let's go over to Hong Kong. That's another boiling point. The Chinese have ordered 150,000 anti-riot officers near Hong Kong to get ready for action ahead of the country's National Day. This is a warning to the anti-government protesters. The Chinese have ordered its forces to ensure security and guard China's southern gate. Unrest in Hong Kong is a critical issue for Beijing ahead of the huge celebration. This city, Hong Kong, has been rocked for more than 100 days by pro-democratic street protests. The police authority of the province in southern China, that's right up against the border with Hong Kong, urged the land, naval, and air forces across the region to conduct more drills to improve their combat capabilities. This all ahead of the country's National Day on October 1st. Hong Kong has seen more than 100 days of street protests which called for democratic reforms. A Hong Kong pop star and protest organizer urged the U.S. Congress to take action against China over this crackdown on the months-long protest in the city. Cantopop star Denise Ho, whose music has been banned in mainland China because of her activism, made a plea for universal human rights in an appearance that infuriated Beijing. This is not a plea for so-called foreign interference. This is a plea for democracy, she told us to a congressional commission in Washington. Ho said China's clampdown in Hong Kong marked a test for all who believe in a world that is free, open, and civil. If Hong Kong fails, it could easily become the springboard for the totalitarian regime of China to push its rules and priorities overseas, utilizing its economic powers to conform others to their communistic values. This is a quote from Ho. The country's ruling Communist Party will celebrate the 70th anniversary of the founding of the regime on October 1st. And the ongoing pro-democracy unrest is one of the most sensitive and critical issues that the Chinese face at this time. The authority demanded its troops to carry out more live-fire drills to sharpen their skills. Officers have conducted counterterrorism drills in 21 cities in that province across from the border in mainland China. Unrest in Hong Kong began at the beginning of June when the city's government tried to pass a bill that would have allowed criminal suspects to be extradited to mainland China to stand trial. That bill was suspended indefinitely by the government in June, but the rallies have morphed into a wider pro-democracy movement that calls for government reforms and universal suffering, among other things. Demonstrators in Hong Kong are angry about what they see as a creeping interference by Beijing in their city's affairs, despite a promise of autonomy. China says it's committed to the Hong Kong formula, denies meddling, and says the city is an internal Chinese issue. It has accused foreign powers, particularly the U.S. and Britain, of fomenting the unrest and told us all to mind our own business. Well, while Hong Kong has been shaken by this 100 days of huge pro-democracy progress, activists have adopted a host of creative ways to fuel the movement away from the barricades. From laser penlight shows to flash mob sing-alongs and human chains, we looked at some inventive methods embraced by a movement that shows no signs of giving up. They're very determined, folks. Now let's go to the U.S. Let's look at some of our Democrat political activists and politicians. Some of their comments are those that are looking for the presidency in 2020. And we're going to be doing this. I'll talk more about it and tell you why and where. But right now, let's look at where we are at now. Right now, our budget deficit smacks $1 trillion mark. And that's the highest in U.S. history in 7 years. The U.S. government red ink for fiscal 2019, that's swelled past the $1 million mark in August. That's just for 1 year, folks. And that's the first time that level has been eclipsed in 7 years, according to our Treasury Department. The total shortfall rose to nearly $1.07 trillion, and that's thanks to a difference between revenue and expenses of more than $214 billion in August. The government last saw that large fiscal deficit in 2012 when the gap was nearly $1.1 trillion. During his presidential campaign, President Trump promised economic growth that would easily take care of the tax cuts and new spending he planned. His 2017 tax break for corporations and individuals has helped contribute to the deficit that has grown from over $584 billion in 2016. Revenue has accelerated slightly in 2019 to about $200 billion a month, but so have expenditures, which are averaging $377 billion a month, or about $25 billion a month more than in 2018. Last year closed with a $779 billion deficit. As the deficit has grown, so's the national debt. It's now about $22.5 trillion. That's up 13% since Trump took office. Now, the good news, the deficit as a percentage of GDP has contracted significantly over the past several years. In 2009, it peaked at 9.8, and now it's down to about 5%. Why am I bringing this out now? Well, if you've been listening to the crazy Dems, all of them practically, that want to be president in 2020, they got some fantastic things they're offering. But you know, folks, I need to ask you a couple of questions. Who's going to pay for it all? Who's going to add to the trillions of dollars of national debt that we now have? We can't pay it. Quite frankly, I don't think our children and grandchildren can pay it. The easiest way to get out will be inflation. That's where gradually your dollar buys less and less, and what we've experienced since about 1911 when we got the Federal Reserve. But it has to be paid for, folks, and it will be, one way or another. Remember that when you hear these promises. Now, I want to talk about different candidates, and we're going to do this each week. I can't get them all in 1 week, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what they all started, where they're at, what they want to do. Not taking anything except availability of recent comments as to who starts first, and we are going to start with good old Bernie. You know, He's a dyed-in-the-heart communist anyway. Let's see what old good-hearted Bernie would do. Well, he'd give free health care in college to everybody, including the illegals. And he notes we've got to legalize all undocumented persons. Now, in addition to that, what he wants to do is have open borders. He would get rid of ICE and certainly the wall, maybe even the gates where people stop and show their passports or visas. Open borders, everything free for everybody. I guess everybody in Central America, South America, Africa, wherever they want to come from. A quote from him, from Bernie. Let me also say something that's gotten me into trouble. I'm a supporter of Medicare for all. Now, this is Bernie, a quote from him. And that means that everybody in the country has health care, including undocumented. He told this to a crowd of his supporters. Here's another quote. When I say I want to make public colleges and universities tuition free, that also includes the undocumented. I hope as soon as possible the undocumented will not be undocumented. That's my goal, he added. And we've already heard in the past where he wants open borders. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going to happen there. Sanders made similar promises of more freebies last week, basically asserting that new mothers will save $23,000 on childbirth under his universal health care scheme. Average cost of childbirth in the U.S., $32,000. Average cost of childbirth with Medicare for all, $0. That was a post by Sanders on social media. And that number, folks, that will climb because, you see, illegals will qualify too. And they're still going to arrive more and more by the millions if Bernie gets his way, because we're going to open the floodgates. The borders will be open. Here's Bernie's wish list. Let me just point out a few things he wants. Democrat Socialist Bernie Sanders published a list of rights that all Americans are entitled to, regardless of income, regardless of whether they're now legal or not. They have a right to a decent job that pays a living wage, even illegals. They have a right to free health care. That's right, free. They have a right to complete education free, affordable housing free, a clean environment free, a secure retirement free. Free! Every American, regardless of income, is entitled to it, even illegals. Just ask Bernie. And do you think any patriotic, sane America could vote for him? Well, recent polling from the key primary states of New Hampshire and Iowa may point out some big trouble for Biden, with Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren making major gains before the voters head to the polls. But most people agree that their policies are so near the same that Sanders and Warren, one will replace the other. They will merge. One will undoubtedly endorse the other after they merge. They won't both stay in the race. When that happens, and it looks like it'll be Warren, she will be the one to go on with Bernie's flag. And we'll be covering Elizabeth Warren with material in another broadcast. Well, now let's look over here to, what's his name, Bohuja, the homosexual mayor of South Bend, Indiana. He's got a quote I'd like you to listen to. He said, "A day of reckoning is coming over the GOP and Christianity." That's right. Democrat presidential candidate Mayor Pete says Republicans will face a reckoning over a policy agenda he says is out of sync with Christian values. I can think of a lot of people that I'd like to discuss Christian values with, but the homosexual would not be one of them. That's me talking. Speaking on MSNBC's Morning Joe, this individual kicked off a day of television appearances which he highlighted his Christian faith. Now, he is an open homosexual, okay? He doesn't deny it. He's got his daddy. He's the female. What a president. Anyway, he asserted that Republicans are known for beating people on the head with their faith while following a policy agenda aimed at reducing assistance for the poor, and other policies he said were odds with that message. He said there's going to be a reckoning over that. Yeah, Mayor Pete, there'll be a day of reckoning, okay? That reckoning won't be between you and conservatives. No, that reckoning will be before a holy God. And then we have Andrew Yang. Now, he's got something that we can all relate to because he said that because of climate change, we'll probably have to give up our car ownership. Can you relate to that? No more cars, Mr. and Mrs. America. You don't need them. Now, I don't know what's going to happen to all the people that make those cars. But anyway, I guess he hasn't faced that. Presidential candidate Andrew Yang says the United States may have to eliminate private car ownership to combat climate change. During MSNBC's Climate Forum at Georgetown University, Yang told his host, quote, "We might not own our own cars by 2015, end quote. He pointed out this would wean the United States economy off fossil fuels, describing private ownership as, quote, really inefficient and bad for the environment and certainly not necessary. Privately owned cars would be replaced by a constant roving fleet of electric cars, a quote from this candidate for president. Wow. Wow. You've got the ability to envision the future. In your proposal on a universal income, his host asked, you've played the whole chess game, and you see what it looks like at the other end. Play the chess game out for me on climate change. He did. What does the world look like to you in 2050? What physically do you think we will do differently then than we do now, resulting in our fight for climate change? Yang replied, well, I mentioned before that we do not have to own private cars. Our current private ownership and usage model is really inefficient and bad for the environment. Yang's climate plan calls for nearly $5 trillion in spending over 20 years. His proposal would include embracing the impacts of climate change and zero emissions standard for all cars by 2030. I'm going to bring you more from this pack of clowns in coming broadcasts. This from the Democrats, those that are looking to replace Donald Trump. We'll be taking it up as the weeks continue. Well, Republican National Committee Chairman Ronna McDaniel points out that the 20 Dems want to tear down our border walls. That's right. National Republican Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel touted President Donald's leadership on border security and blasted the Dems on this issue. Her comments came in a recent tweet. She wrote, because of Donald Trump's leadership, right now, illegal border crossings are down 56% since May. We're supposed to have 500 miles of new border up by 2020. Meanwhile, 134,000 apprehensions in Mexico by the Mexican government. 2020 Democrats want to tear down existing borders, and she adds, we can't let that happen. A warning that we should all heed. And on the subject of borders, let's remember, illegal aliens are not fine or great people. I don't know what definition others may use for describing people as fine or great, but illegal aliens, by definitions, do not meet my standards. And I don't think they meet yours, folks. Not to be great people. Fine, great people do not break laws just because those laws are inconvenient. Illegals come here to plunder our resources and redistribute those assets to their own benefit. And unfortunately, our system allows this. One doesn't become an FGP, that's a fine, great person, by working for wages, not even if he gets the going rate and pays income tax on the money. You see, that just displaces a private citizen who's already here, who's never even offered the job, who misses the opportunity to fully participate in society and feel the pride of making his own way instead of being a dependent on the government or his friends and family. The fine, great people, they don't come here to exploit our social safety net. They don't come bringing children or giving birth to them on arrival. Many women making the trip to enter illegally are raped multiple times on the journey. Females as young as 9 years old, can get pregnant. The time required with asylum claims in the courts is more than enough to produce babies. Such babies are among the few whom liberals don't want to abort. You haven't heard them down there with Planned Parenthood, have you? Not because the children are human beings, but because they're used to prevent deportation of their mothers, their anchor babies. The babies are automatically American citizens and entitled to receive care at the expense of American taxpayers. The fine, great people would not subject children to a journey here or allow their children to be sent out to a country to escort in more fake families. You see, these people are horrible parents. What chance do the kids have to become normal after this type of exposure? Fine, great people would learn the language and the laws and apply for immigration before leaving their country of origin. And if they couldn't come in, if it was denied, they'd stay at home. They wouldn't treat the children they wouldn't treat the sidewalks like bathrooms and break into unguarded homes and businesses. They don't do those things. Not fine, great people. They wouldn't strangle old women or rape a dog to death. They wouldn't rape little boys or girls. They wouldn't run drugs. They wouldn't traffic sex slaves. The FGP of Guatemala are still in Guatemala, trying to make Guatemala great. Ditto for those from Honduras and Mexico. We've got more than enough citizens to fill our jobs and even, sadly, to commit rape, theft, and murder. We don't need the scavenging parasites of other cultures to come here and destroy the country faster than we can save it. We're economically and socially being bled to death, and illegals will continue to hasten our demise. Too many leeches was a flawed medical approach that killed George Washington. Remember that? And now they're killing our nation as well. Now these fine, great people that are coming in illegal, they're not fine, great people. Not at all. And Republicans had better stem the tide of illegal immigration, or we're going to be liberated. Not liberated, obliterated. For the Republican Party and indeed the American people, 2020 is a time for choosing on immigration, and you better understand it. Illegal immigration is out of control, and there appears to be no stopping it. While many Americans understand this, others don't fully realize that choosing to stay the course and do nothing is a losing position. Listeners, time is not on our side. There's a standard business term often used in tech startup companies: default dead. If your business is increasing in revenue fast enough that it'll be profitable before you run out of money, it is default alive. If not, your business is default dead, and you need to change things quickly and drastically. You can apply the same principle to the political power of each party. If a political party is gaining voters at a rate that it will achieve a majority before the next election, then it's default alive. If a party is not gaining enough voters or is losing them at a rate that will make them a minority before the next election, then it is default dead. On a timeline of a decade or more, the Republican Party is default dead, not just in states like Texas and Florida, but across the nation. The Democratic Party is importing massive numbers of voters and then pledging to work for them on behalf of those newly arrived people. That not only gives the Democratic Party the numbers they may need, it also gives them the edge in energy and motivation. On the other hand, the Republicans are not importing any new voters from foreign lands, and their current voter base is swamped under the waves of people who believe the propaganda that the future of this nation belongs to them. When the GOP becomes irrelevant, it'll no longer be just a party, but it'll be a party that is lost. Every value, every principle that party claims to hold in high regard will be lost. The First Amendment will be a thing of the past. With the inability to organize, the Second Amendment will soon follow. What little is left of the Fourth Amendment will surely be removed as well. Listeners, this is a time for choosing. The GOP can choose to remain default dead, or it can choose to change and work towards something sometimes becoming default alive. By doing nothing, the GOP is choosing to maintain and remain default dead, and its time as a relevant entity in the U.S. is very limited. If the party chooses to do something about this issue, drastic change is needed. Not just, yes, as any business or similarity entity that finds itself in that position. What that change should be is clear. Listen to me, folks. Immigration laws must be enforced. Legal immigration laws must be drastically altered, and the party must refuse to acknowledge birthright citizenship. Failure to do any one of these things places the GOP on a path of eventual irrelevance. What is less clear is the path to accomplish this change. When a company needs to alter direction and a senior member of the company is not on board, that member must either be convinced of the necessity of that change or be asked to move out and move away from the company. Every rank-and-file Republican voter understands what needs to be done with respect to immigration. They've known it for years. The leadership have appeared to know it as well. That's why they've paid lip service to enforcing the laws and securing the border. At this moment, the leadership of the GOP must either accept that the party must fundamentally change into a party that consists of singular views with respect to immigration and a fervent desire to act on that view, or that leadership must be asked to move on. And good listeners, this includes every congressman, senator, governor, and unelected party leadership individual. Failure to act decisively and effectively to end illegal immigration and reform legal immigration should be grounds for removal from office in the next election. This is a time for choosing. We must choose to put our party and our nation back on the path of being default alive. Another factor that's giving the Republican base, the true patriots, a problem. Listen to this, folks. Patriotism, religion, kids, lower priorities for younger Americans. These are things that are gaining. Americans place less value on the importance of patriotism, religion, and having children than they did 2 decades ago. This is a shift driven largely by the changing views of younger Americans, according to a recent poll. A Wall Street Journal NBC News poll recently released found that hard work remained a top priority for Americans, but that the value placed on the other 3 has significantly decreased. That compares to a poll from 21 years ago that found Americans listed hard work, patriotism, religion, and having children as their top priorities. 61% of Americans in the new survey listed patriotism as very important. That's a 9-point drop from 1998. Patriotism is still widely received as important by Americans over the age of 55. There you find 79% saying it's very important, but less than half of Americans aged 28 to 38, just 42%, cited patriotism as being a very important value. I guess, folks, this could largely be a result of our educational system. 48% of Americans cited religion as being very important. That's a 14-point decrease from 21 years ago. Younger Americans again drove the decreasing value. 67% of Americans over the age of 55 cited religion or belief in God as very important. This is compared to 30% aged 18 to 38 based on the poll. You think taking Bibles out of school could have been a contributing factor there? And just 43% of Americans have said having children were very important. That's a 16-point decrease from 98 based on the polls. I bet your illegal immigrants are going to outproduce that number, don't you? Well, conservative host Rush Limbaugh says millions of Americans are now seething over the Democrats and the media treatment of President Trump. And I heard just today that if the Dems really want to lose this election, keep talking about impeaching Brett Kavanaugh, our Supreme Court Justice. A quote from Rush, I think there's across the country a vast expanse of people that think that there are millions and millions and millions of America are quietly seething. They're getting enraged over everything that's gone on since Trump was inaugurated. Limbaugh said Americans are enraged over the Russia investigation and the supposed bombshell story of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. The Mueller investigation, the false, phony claims of collusion that amounted to nothing, the media's acting like it. Nothing happened. Okay, so we failed. Well, here comes the phony baloney Kavanaugh thing, where it's learned that an editor spiked every bit of morsel evidence in the story that would have disqualified the story from running. They kicked it out. The New York Times over the weekend published a story on Kavanaugh, New allegations about a sexual conduct against him from his times as a student at Yale. The allegation hinged on the recollection of a Yale classmate who knows the news outlet reported contacted the FBI and lawmakers during Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing. And you know what? The witness there said she couldn't remember it happening. You see, that's phony. It's trumped up. You know what it really is, folks. It's an attempt to take down our president, President Donald Trump, who can oppose all of these issues, has opposed them, and is taking stands to make America great again. Goodbye until next week.